Get ready for that football show with those fantasy guys.
Hello and welcome to That Football Show with those fantasy guys.
And live for Week 7, we are those fantasy guys.
It absolutely is Week 7, Jay, and without further ado, let's go right into key injuries, and we'll take a look at the list. It's actually
Pretty short.
surprisingly short for as far as key injury lists go, but dramatically strong. We have Aaron Rodgers, Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, Trevor Siemian, Leonard Fournette, Golden Tate, Emmanuel Sanders, and Demaryius Thomas. All big names. Jay, who's coming off the list at you?
Obviously, it's Aaron Rodgers, A-Rod. I mean, he's out for the fantasy year. Maybe he'll be back for the playoffs if they can tread water. They're in a pretty weak division. Needless to say, we're not worried about that. We're worried about fantasy football, and this affects Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, whoever their running back is. I mean, this affects every single one of those players is downgraded because of the injury to Aaron Rodgers.
Now, being the expert on college football that you are, and you bring that knowledge to fantasy football and the NFL level, what about Hundley?
I like Brent Hundley. You can't judge what you saw last week. The game plan was not Brent Hundley's game plan. Now they have a week to study for Brent Hundley, that week to prepare specifically what he's strong at, what he's not strong at. He's been in the system for a couple of years. I expect pretty decent output from Brent Hundley. The last time Aaron Rodgers was hurt, they have people come in and can effectively run the offense. I would wait. I wouldn't exactly go out there and pick him up unless you're desperate and you have Matthew Stafford or Deshaun Watson on a bye week. Maybe there's no other quarterbacks out there. If you only had Aaron Rodgers and now maybe you had Matthew Stafford as your backup and he's on a bye week, maybe you don't have any other options than Hundley.
The reason why I asked the question about Hundley was more not about him specifically and not to the Aaron Rodgers owner or for the Aaron Rodgers owner, but more for the owners of Jordy Nelson and Ty Montgomery and Devontae Adams. What does it mean to those owners? Should they be in panic mode?
Yes.
Fantastic. Let's move on to the next segment. The Hunt for Red October.
Finding the ultimate sub.
Just like we've done it a million times, Jay. Let's take a look at who the teams who are on a bye this week. I believe there's only two, right? The Detroit Lions and the Houston Texans. But that comes with a plethora of fantasy points thanks to one Deshaun Watson.
Oh my God, Deshaun Watson is making DeAndre Hopkins and Wolf Fuller #1 wide receiver options. If you have either one of these guys, what Deshaun Watson is doing is making these guys unbelievable. So, I mean, that's a huge buy if you have any one of those three guys. You're losing out. You got to fill. You got to stay here to find out where you can replace those guys.
Agreed. That's why you watch TFS. And with that, let's move in to last week's picks. Jay, who did you have for the Hunt for Red October last week?
Last week, my Hunt for Red October was Robbie Anderson. He had not outstanding output, but I was on the right train. Why? Opportunity. That's what we always talk about is opportunity. He had 12 targets. He only had 4 receptions for 76 yards, but if he could have done anything with those targets, they had one in the corner of the end zone for him that was over his head by a foot. I mean, it was not a great Hunt for Red October, but it was so close to being a great pick.
It was very close, and like I said last week, I was on the same wavelength as you. I was just going in a little bit different direction. The results were Austin Seferian-Jenkins, 8 catches on 11 targets, 46 yards, much smaller yardage output than your guy, but he should have had 2 touchdowns, Jay. When you hit the pylon in the NFL, it's a touchdown.
I don't know why we're overanalyzing these things. Clearly, that was a touchdown.
So we'll call it Austin
Call it 2
Seferian-Jenkins.
touchdowns.
2 touchdowns. As a Patriots fan, I will take it.
Let me tell you what. If your commissioner doesn't give you those 6 points, you have them called TFS.
Well, there you go. There's an endorsement right there from the mouth of Jason Walker. And he's clearly the #1 target in New York now. If you added him after week 3 when we told you to go out and get ASJ, you now have your tight end 1 for the rest of the season. You're welcome. There is more to come, Jay, on this edition of TFS of You're Welcome.
Oh, and I agree. And #1, what you just said, you get if you had listened to you specifically saying to pick this guy up in week 3, you have probably maybe the number 3 tight end for the rest of the year behind only Gronk and Kelsey.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The guy's going to be a target monster from week to week. And if you haven't added him, there's still an opportunity. I believe in the cash league that we're in, I think he's still a free agent.
Crazy.
But probably not after this week. Speaking of this week, Jay, let's move on to this week's picks. Who do you have for us this week?
This week I'm coming at you with Tyler Gabriel, only owned in 32% of the leagues. He's only started in 9% of leagues. He has 8 targets, 4 receptions, 39 yards last week. But the Falcons may be about to take the Super Bowl losing team nosedive that almost happens every year. Right. They just blew a 17-point lead at home to Smoking Jay Cutler and the Miami Dolphins. I mean, how can you possibly do that? I don't know. Maybe you don't run the ball in the second half. Where would they have learned a lesson about that? I digress. Anyways, the Patriots have given up 300 yards in 6 straight games.
Absolutely.
300 yards. They just broke the record of 5 straight games that they owned.
Right.
And they're going to be at 7 straight games after Sunday. But the point is, yes, they have Julio Jones, but Mohamed Sanu is hurt. And unless Julio Jones has 250 yards, which is possible, Taylor Gabriel is going to have the opportunity to torch the secondary. Quick screens, bubble screens, fake screen flies. I mean, the Patriots secondary, the communication isn't that good, and they have nobody with this type of speed to cover him. Look for Taylor Gabriel to have a phenomenal game.
Yeah, and I love the pick because of the matchup. Patriots are just the worst of the worst as far as passing defense goes this year. We've seen it week in and week out. If you got guys playing against the Patriots, you've got to start them.
Got to start them.
You got to start them against the Patriots. They're one of 3 teams, and we'll talk about the other 2 in this episode, that if you got a matchup against them, you got to go with them. Jay, this week, I really want to tell you to trust Blake Bortles. Okay? And here's why. Blake Bortles is playing the Indianapolis Colts. And you just talked about a bad secondary. This secondary is equally as bad, if not worse. The only reason why they don't have as bad stats as the Patriots is because the offense isn't good enough to push the teams to make them throw. Check this out. They are averaging 300 yards per game and have allowed 9 passing touchdowns on the season. The Colts are so bad in the secondary, in fact, they have allowed either a 300-yard passer or multi-touchdown passing performance in every game this season. I just want to rip through them real quick for you. Week 1, Jared Goff, 106 yards and a touchdown. Week 2, Carson Palmer, 332 and a touchdown. Week 3, Deshaun Kaiser, the guy who just lost his starting job and now is going to get it back, 242, 2 touchdowns. Week 4, Russell Wilson, 295, 2 touchdowns. Brian Hoyer,
who just got benched,
353 and 2 touchdowns. Marcus Mariota, 306 and a touchdown. The Colts defense is awful. Blake Bortles gets them this week. If you still, I still haven't said trust Blake Bortles. I still haven't said it. But here goes.
If you have Deshaun Watson,
pick up Blake Bortles, start Blake Bortles versus Indy, and reap the rewards. It just feels dirty. It just feels wrong. But it's true. The numbers don't lie.
Numbers never lie.
After 6 weeks. Now, you can argue that after 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 weeks that maybe the stats are inconsistent. After 6 weeks of football, you are what you are, and the Colts secondary are awful. So go out and grab Blake Bortles. This guy could get you a win this week, especially with Leonard Fournette maybe on the injury list. So let's move on to tough sits this week and get this icky feeling out.
Sit down, Waldo.
Last week I told you to sit Antonio Brown. I'm not afraid to take chances and go out on a limb. Absolutely. But Antonio Brown had 155 yards, and I'm not sure if you saw it. He did have a touchdown.
I did see it, and I will come rescue you for this. He was on his way to maybe a 70, 80-yard day, and he just had that ridiculous.
Turn around and catch the ball, cornerback.
Yeah, just, you know. Hey,
bat it down.
I'm a wide receiver. I catch the ball. I score touchdowns. That's what Antonio Brown did.
What I loved about the play, though, was the subtle move he made that the ball gets tipped. He reaches reaches out his hand to grab the ball and stopped his body at the
Yeah.
same time to avoid the guy taking him out, and then just ran for the touchdown.
Certainly is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. So Jay, last week I was not feeling great about my picks in the past, so I give you a twofer, and both came true to fruition last week. I told you to sit Aaron Jones. He had 13 carries for 41 yards. Ick, yuck. Aaron Rodgers is now out, and Aaron Jones's numbers because of that might get worse. He's probably going to get more opportunities because they're going to try and protect that young quarterback, but I just don't see how defenses are going to assume that Hundley is going to beat them until he proves he can. This is going to be a terrible downturn for Aaron Jones, Ty Montgomery owners. Like you said, should the owners panic? Yes. They have real issues going forward. I think Jordy Nelson might be the only one who doesn't really see a dramatic downtick. I see him still being that number one threat on that team. Now, the other guy I told you to sit down last week was on pace for an MVP candidacy. Probably still is even after last week. I told you to sit down Alex Smith because he was playing the Steelers. Ooh. Well, guess what? The Steelers have the number one passing defense in the NFL, which is something you learned here last week. He was 19 for 34, 246 and a touchdown. Now, that doesn't sound that bad. But here's what I have to tell you about this game. In the first half, the Chiefs had 6 yards of offense. That Steelers defense is nasty, and it proves that Alex Smith is not matchup proof. That you have to be weary if this is the guy that you're relying on to get you to a fantasy championship. You have to look down the road at the schedule and find out if there's another quarterback that you need to add with a better matchup in case he plays, I don't know, the Steelers again or an equally good defense. So let's move on to this week, Jay, which is what I was trying to do.
Awesome. This week, I'm going at you. This is a guy that has a history of big game, small game, small game, small game, big game, small game, small game, small game.
Like
and Mark Ingram just had his big game. You know what that means? 3 to 4 weeks of him doing nothing starting this week. I just call him Mr. Inconsistency. I might even sell high on him right now. Someone might be desperate and need a running back. Sell him Mark Ingram because I'll tell you what, Kamara's probably taking over the job by the end of the year anyways. His stock's not as high as it's going to be all year, and he's going to have probably an 8-carry, 32-yard game.
Yeah, I love it. So he's not only a tough sit, he's also a sell high.
Possibly,
combining
yes.
those combinations. Yep. So, now, ready? Here we go. Melvin Gordon has 127 touches. Now, I say touches because he catches and he runs the ball. And that's something to keep in mind as I speak here. For 578 yards and 7 touchdowns on the season. Great stud numbers. The dual threat running back has practically been the entire offense for the Los Angeles Rams, scoring a touchdown in every game this season except for one. But guess what? Here comes Denver and their number one rushing defense. Jay, they have yet to allow a rushing touchdown. The Denver Broncos have not allowed a rushing touchdown yet on the season. They are the only team in the NFL that has not allowed a rushing touchdown. And, of course, like I said, now they travel to L.A.
Orleans Darko didn't score a touchdown Monday night?
He did not score a touchdown Monday night. He rushed for 117 yards, no touchdowns. All right. Which brings me to my point. I'm glad you brought that up.
That's why I'm here.
So, the way to beat the Denver Broncos, as crazy as it sounds, is through the air, and more specifically, through the tight end. For some reason, they cannot stop a tight end. And to my point, Evan Ingram, probably the only receiver on the New York Giants, could not be slowed down. I think he had 80 yards and a touchdown against them and was the reason Denver lost the game. This game is going to go through Hunter Henry. This game, Henry has had success against Denver in the past. Denver can't stop the tight end. They are going to force the ball to Hunter Henry this week. They're going to try and win this game through the air at home. But this is not about Hunter Henry.
I was wondering where you were going.
It's not about the Denver Broncos. It's not about the tight end from the New York Jets. It's about sitting a dynamic playmaker in the NFL because of the matchup. Now, that's a tough sit. Sit down Melvin Gordon this week. We'll see how it works out for me. Let's move on to Wall Street. Jay, this is my favorite segment of the year. I say that all the time, but it's my favorite time of the year for this segment because at week 6, we can start to say, I told you so. And that's my favorite feeling of all time. And we've got a couple of those in the roster right now. But who do you got for us this week that in a couple more weeks we can say, I told you so?
This week I got 2 for you.
Two. Love it.
I had 3, but I had to subtract 1. So I'm going to tell you.
That makes 2.
So now we're on to 2. I'm going to tell you buy low on Teddy Bridgewater.
Oh, love it.
He's back at practice, and he is going to assume the starting role hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks. With the loss of Aaron Rodgers, the NFC North is wide open for anybody to win. Anybody,
Absolutely.
including the Packers. They could still win it. The Bears aren't going to win it, but anybody else could win it. And I'll tell you what, if Teddy Bridgewater comes back and is able to give a little boost to the Vikings, it could boost your team too, right into the playoff stretch run. The other guy, Juju Smith-Schuster.
Oh.
I am telling you, it's well known that Martavis Bryant supposedly requested a trade. This is the same Martavis Bryant that said Juju Smith-Schuster in the offseason was not competing for the number 2 spot. You know, Martavis Bryant's spot. You know who's getting more playing time?
Juju.
Juju is getting more playing time. Martavis Bryant is not going to get traded, but he might curl up in a ball and cry about it because he seems like he's a little sensitive. After the Steelers have stand pat by him being suspended for entire seasons, this guy's going to be asked to be traded because he's not playing enough. I don't want that kind of cancer on my team, and I don't think Mike Tomlin's going to put up with that type of stuff, and he's going to prove it by giving more and more to Juju as the season goes on. And by the time we're in our playoffs, he's going to be the clear-cut number 2 with all kinds of, what do we want?
Opportunity.
That's what you got.
I agree 100%. And the thing about the NFL is, as much as in fantasy football, it's what have you done for me lately? Juju is giving them much more juju on the field than Bryant. I love the pick. Jay, this week I'm going to tell you to buy low on a superstar that you can still get for practically nothing. Julio Jones is going, this is your absolute last chance to buy low on Julio Jones. On the season, he has 25 catches for 367 yards and no touchdowns. That changes this week. Jay, this is, like I said, the absolute last opportunity you have to go out and add a player who could win you a fantasy championship. This is a guy that you need to go out and pursue guns a-blazing. I mean, send out the offers. Even if you haven't talked to the owner, you know that the owners are frustrated with Julio Jones. So if you can sneak this guy off of somebody's roster for maybe a Mark Ingram who just had a big day.
Ooh, I like that.
That's a trigger you need to be pulling all day long because it ends this week. Julio Jones gets off the snide against the Patriots and kicks off the rest of his season with some great matchups down the stretch. Julio is still perhaps the best wide receiver in the NFL, even if he hasn't gotten the touchdown. And the coach has made it a point to come out and say, we're not getting him the ball enough. We need to get him the ball more. He might have 15 targets this week against the Patriots.
The damage he could do with 15 targets in that game, you'll never get him after the Patriots game.
That last chance to buy low on Julio Jones. Yep. So go out and get him if you can. Jay, let's move on to weekly leagues and wrap this episode up. Jay, you are the master at weekly leagues. Tell us who you have this week.
Well, this week we're going off an injury that is going to result in production for you at a reasonable price because he hasn't exploded yet, like you talked about Julio Jones. I'm telling you this week, Demaryius Thomas against the LA Superchargers with the injury to Emmanuel Sanders. The offense is going to go through Demaryius Thomas.
Great.
He is going to have every opportunity. And you know what the Chargers like to do is give up points and then try and come back. DT is going to get those points, yards, catches, touchdowns. Get him, build your team around DT this week.
Yeah, I love that pick, especially with Emmanuel Sanders out. I mean, they're calling up guys from the practice squad. There's a big buzz on the fantasy world about Benny Fowler. Demaryius Thomas is going to get, like Julio Jones, 15 targets in this game. I think he had like 11 last week or something ridiculous like that. So get Demaryius Thomas on your team. Jay, guess what? No Facebook question this week because we ran out of time. That's all the time we have on week number 7 of That Football Show with those fantasy guys.
We are those fantasy guys. Come see us next week for more help.